You're listening to the official broadcast of the Westside Vineyard in Los Angeles, a community of individuals and families connecting with God to change the world.
I want to again extend a warm welcome to those of you who are new. And as Joel said, we have launched into a series which really means a focus that we feel God would have for us this fall, and that is a series entitled Making Relationships Work, Love, Sex, and Marriage. And it's really just built on the simple understanding that God understands that the deepest things we long for are met through relationships, or many of them, and so much of what God has provided for us is relationships. And we kind of know that, and then we also know that they don't oftentimes work, that a lot of times there's just so much in our relational life that's not leading to all of the satisfaction. It's kind of out of that we're saying, God, speak to us, help to orient us. And so a couple weeks ago we looked at how God speaks from the beginning and says it's not good that we're alone. And we kind of have to stop and just be sobered by our own sense of aloneness and the fears of that and how we try to avoid it. But there is something about facing aloneness and also realizing that out of that there's what only God can meet, because He's the only one present all the time, and there's what others can affirm but not be the source of. And what does that mean? And so we looked at that in marriage last week, realizing that some of the challenges that comes when we think of how God then brings together the potential for marriage and relating and creating life is that we have false expectations, kind of this very, I think, sometimes skewed expectations. So we have these ideals, and the ideals lead to an ordeal, because it's like, I'm expecting you to what? We don't get clear. And when our expectations are not really clear and we don't understand the purpose, we're going to sometimes be unsatisfied because we just haven't thought that out. And last week was really looking and challenging ourselves, marrieds and singles alike, to think about what marriage is and isn't, and how important that is and how God speaks into it. And this morning I want us to continue forward with the idea of, well, how is it that God's created us uniquely as this kind of male-female partnership, if you will. And in the weeks ahead, we're going to be less kind of lofty. We're going to begin to look at how do we all have our histories with conflict and anger and how we work it out. We're going to look at how is it that we become emotionally safer people, because sometimes we're not the safest people emotionally for others, and how do we connect in that way. We're going to look at a number of things, but I want to look one more time at the larger picture. And we find in Genesis, the very beginning, what I view to be kind of God saying things are a little bigger than you think. If I said, how big is your reality? Most of us would say it's as big as what I now know to be, I know about. So once before, people thought the world and reality was as big as us and the sun. The sun rotates around our world, and that's it. And then we go, ooh, it's bigger. There's more out there. And now we know there's more out there. And probably every month we start finding out there's even more out there. But God said from the beginning, there's much more out there. And that's really what Genesis is saying to humanity. Here's a poetic summary of just how the larger sense of who we are, from where, and how we find ourselves in this nature. And I say poetic summary because it's not God's intent to be telling us the how. He kind of does that more poetically here. But we read, and I invite you to follow along with these words in Genesis 1, a portion from Genesis 1, a portion from Genesis 2. It begins, of course, by saying God created the heavens and earth, and it tells us about the different aspects of creation that we are a part of. And he's going through this unfolding of how each was good. And then he comes to humanity, and he says, now one that will bear my image. And we pick up here in verse 26 where it says, then God said, let us make man, humanity, in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, or govern it, take care of it. We're going to reflect who God is in terms of being co-creators of life and bringing chaos into order. That's kind of what humanity has this place of. Then in chapter 2, he picks up and kind of captures, how did this male-female element come along? And he's describing how we should understand each other. Not so much the how, I think, but he said, then God said, it's not good for the man's alone. I will make a helper suitable for him. So we pick up, the Lord God created the man to fall into a deep sleep, and while he was sleeping, he took one of the man's ribs and closed up the place with flesh. Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib he had taken out of the man, and he brought her to the man. And the man said, wow. No, the man said, This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. There's this complementary. For this reason now, because of this unique, distinct way in which we are, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and they will become one flesh. The man and his wife were both naked and felt no shame. There was this sense of complete comfort in who they were, is what's being described there. And in this poetic summary of life, there's so much that we could say, but I think, again, God's unveiling the larger reality in which he is saying, this is how I want you to understand that you are, as either men or women, you are created with this sense of complementary nature, and you have the sense in which Adam feels aloneness. There's something about just who he is that is not okay. We cannot live in that way. And so as God creates, you almost have a sense of when he sees Eve, you kind of almost imagine him going, wow, hey, God, good improvement on creation, I like this, there's something about her that he is wowed by. And I think he's drawn and wowed, and there's this kind of draw to her and probably her to him because, on one hand, they're alike. He has not found anything like him. And that speaks something to us. We need to stop and realize it's the fact that there is someone that shares our humanity, there's a lot in common with. That is the only reason, that's essential to our being able to come together and relate as men and women together. We have something in common, but he's also drawn to her because they're not alike. Because it's like, she's different. And he began in that moment to try to figure out this mystery of one who is like him, but also not like him, and trying to figure out, I don't get her. And from however long you believe this moment to have been in creation till today, men are still trying to figure out who you are as women, and women, men. It's like we are still, in fact, what's fascinating is that today, while we sit here, there is more research going on, more money spent on research going on to try to figure out the differences between men and women and how we relate than ever before. We are still focused on this sense of there's differences. How can we understand this to relate better? And there's just so much there. And of course, now we can kind of try to understand it maybe more physiologically and see how that helps us. And I like Mark Gungor. He does a humorous way of talking about and kind of trying to surmise some of the things about being able to understand how our brains are different. And so he describes, and taking from him, how if we were to have a man's brain right here, and we were to kind of open it up, what would we see? Well, one way to describe it is you would find that in that man's brain is a whole storage of different little boxes. Just a whole set of different little boxes. And you keep looking, and you realize that the way the man's brain works is that you only can open one box at a time. Just one box. You open it, and there's a box for everything. There's a box for relationship to wife, a box for sports, a box for sex, a box for work, a box. There's a lot of little boxes, but you can only open and deal with one at a time. And when you're done, close it up and put it back. And this is critical. Don't ever let the boxes touch each other. They're never to touch each other. They need to stay in their place. And by the way, when a man is stressed, the way that he deals with that stress, because he's always got to get everything figured out, and he's got these gifts to to charge the world, and that's the kind of testosterone. And so how does he deal with stress when he's dealing with, I don't have it all set, and I haven't accomplished it all, and he has a special box called the nothing box. And the nothing box, he has different ways of going to the nothing box. Some man told me today, I got like 4 nothing boxes, you know. And so, and it's that part of him that can, you know, just go to that place and kind of do nothing. You know, this is why it's generally been men who enjoy sports like fishing. You can just do that, and it's actually relieves stress, because it's like I can just step out from this achievement and the challenges of it and just do nothing. Of course, today, we also have these little things called remote controls. They're the nothing box. They're perfect for the nothing box, you know. Just point and then just veg, you know. And we kind of just do nothing, and we want to be in the nothing place. Now the woman's brain, different. The woman's brain, you open it up, there's no boxes. There's this massive ball of wire, and it's all interconnected, and everything is firing, you know, together and interrelated. And so anything that's going on in one's affecting the others, and they're all informing each other. And it's a very different experience of what she's having. And of course, if the ball of wire, the woman's brain, tries to engage the box brain, there's going to be those challenges for her. This is why, for her, you know, the man may be trying to analyze things, but for a woman has this gift of intuition, because everything's connected. So she's able to make connections that he's not easily able to make. But also, when they begin to think about how they talk about things, like something they might remember, like want to tell a story, the man has got it kind of simple. Like he doesn't have all this charge going on, so he remembers just the bottom line. What'd the doctor say? He said, keep it simple, you know, bottom line. But over here, there's no bottom line. This thing's processing all the time, running on this intense thing that's tied more into emotions. He has emotions. He's just having a hard time figuring out where they are. But this thing's running on a lot more. So there's a lot more experience that has to come out. It's processing. So you're engaging this processing, and that processing, you know, is going to be a little more involved when it comes to the sharing of what happened in those two things. So these two things going on. It embeds a lot of things. So anything that happens in the memory is remembered. Everything is remembered. And you discover that. And so, because it's kind of dealt somewhere. For the man, if it ain't in that box and it doesn't run deep, again, bottom line. So we have all these differences in how these two relate. And I think it's very helpful as we begin to look at this. And there's now been about 100 differences between the way we're made up that have been identified in a number of ways. It's helpful to realize that there's a need to kind of just laugh about the fact that we're in this funny process of men trying to understand women and women men. And I think that's healthy. I think God would say you need to laugh. You need to kind of let out a little of the frustration, exhale that. But I also believe, and I think what God wants to challenge us with today, is that I think God would say humor has its place, but there's something even more essential between you than humor, and that's honor. And I think that God understands that we can sometimes need to exhale some of the frustration with a little humor, like, we don't get each other. But what are we inhaling? What are we taking into our souls? And that, I believe, needs to be the restoration of honor. Or to kind of put it in this way, that God would say, don't let the humor we find in our differences allow us to lose the sacred honor inherent in the gift of our complementary partner. I think what we need to realize is as we really sit and stand before what God declared to us in the text we read, that God has given us and created us to be a gift to the other complementary counterpart. And so we need to ask, wow, where are we, men, on really embracing that you are a gift to women? A lot of women are going, don't tell him that, you know, I am God's gift to you, women. No, not in that spirit, but in the rightful sense that you have really were created by God as a complementary counterpart to be able to serve a woman. And women, you, where are you in understanding that, wow, I was created with the intent of being this gift? God created us as complementary counterparts. Now, when we read of that in Genesis, and it speaks of He created Eve as a helper in this way, we might think helper, it just sounds really hard to hear. I hope for all of us, if it implies some kind of subordination or inferiority. And that might be what, when you're just a helper to something, you're not the primary one who drives it or is meeting that need. But actually, that's not what it's implying. And we hear the English word helper, but the Hebrew word that is being used to describe Eve, it's the same word that is used to describe God as helper. God says, using the same word, I am your helper to mankind. And I will come and be your helper. Now, is God subordinate or inferior? Obviously not. It's the very sacred thing of saying, you can't do this alone. I am the one who is going to come and make it possible. So it is really lifted up quite high and not in the way that we hear that word helper in English. And he describes that helper as being, some translations say the suitable helper, some say that's fit for him. And it really means that fits well together. The only one that can accomplish it, the only one who is designed by nature to be able to be that counterpart. There is none other. Women, there is nobody else who's going to meet the needs of a man. Men, there's nobody else who's going to meet the needs of a woman. We have to hear that. We have to get that. We have to kind of let that kind of awaken something in us as we think about who we are and how we're meant to live. As kind of those who kind of tend to look and take from the other. What does it mean if we're actually meant to give to the other? And I think this is part of what God is trying to challenge us with, is to understand how much we have become those who end up alienated and adversarial. And God says, and he goes on to say here, that once they began to try to relate apart from God, it says, well, they tried to be their own. Hey, let's do our own thing. Let's be our own gods. And no longer did they relate out of the place of security with God. Immediately what happens? Some may remember. He describes how there's blame. How Adam and Eve are hiding in the bushes in shame. And when you're hiding in the bushes of shame, all you're going to do is feel defensive, and you're going to sit there and blame the other, and you're going to try to hide yourself. You cannot relate well out of that place. And he begins to speak to them of, some say like the curse, but I think it's the consequences in a way of what's going to unfold. And he basically says, women, you're going to find yourselves in this kind of oppressive need for men that's going to become like a bondage to you, because you're going to try to find in them what you're not finding now in me. And men, you're going to now toil at work, because you're going to be trying to find in that which now, you were meant to know in me. You're meant to live out of security and significance, but now you're going to find this oppressive. And out of that, you begin to see humanity quickly kind of using and abusing men and women, each in their own ways, using and abusing the other. And there's domination, and there's conflict, and there's criticism, and there's all of this taking place. And that's the nature of really how I think that the relationship of men and women generally is, and where it seems to go. And we kind of find ourselves confused. Who am I as a man? Who am I supposed to be as a woman? And how do I relate to the other? And this is where the only way that can be restored is if we get that relationship restored with God. And we who are hiding can come out of our shame and realize, I am accepted by God, and now I have something to give. And this is what Jesus came to bring to bear on humanity. This is why the good news and the hope in all realms, including the relationship of men and women, is that Jesus comes and he says, I am going to take you who may be unacceptable and be in touch with that you're not really who you were meant to be. You're not living that way. Your soul and heart are not so right all the time because you're living, trying to find love in all the wrong places. I'm going to restore you to the Father. I'm going to restore you to your Creator. I am going to bear your sin and separation on the cross. And when I do, I'm going to lead you in the way of finding real life with the Father. And I'm going to allow you to come into that love that is unconditional, Father, Son, and Spirit, that you come into that community of love and you live out of that place, and then you're going to learn to follow my ways, which were what? Don't use your authority to lord over anyone. The first will be last, and the last will be first. And ultimately saying, I didn't come to be served, but to serve and to give my life. And in the end, he gives his life. Now, that is what changes everything. And he says, come into that way of life. Live out of that. And this is what the Apostle Paul picks up on when he begins to step back as a religious leader who kind of had it wrong and all the religious oppression. And he says, wow, this changes everything. This news, this gospel, this Christ is changing everything. And he calls us to live out of this love of God for humanity, this love of Christ for the church. And that's what he speaks of in the book of Ephesians, which is one of the letters that the Apostle Paul wrote in the New Testament, in the Scriptures. And he speaks of this, and he says all social structures change. Between masters and slaves, children and parents, and yes, he begins with between husband and wife. It all changes. Everything changes to becoming that which is not seeking to use and abuse, but is now seeking to serve and sacrifice itself for the good of the other. That's what he says. And he says, this is how it can now look. So he speaks about husbands, wives, and there's a whole lot that we could say in that section that I will place into notes that I wanted to say this morning. But I'm going to move to just the conclusion of that, where we read it, kind of his summary at the end, where he says, now out of that, in Ephesians 5:33, he says, so let each one of you now be different than the way it's been. Let you as husbands love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. He's saying that this relationship is so different that now when you realize that it reflects the covenantal love of God, when you come together in the ultimate way, I think, and then this is how you ought to be trying to relate to each other, with the kind of love that we see in the heavens, the kind of love of Father, Son, and Spirit, in which there is self-sacrifice, giving oneself, respecting and valuing the other, all of this kind of affirmation. This is what it flows in. And I don't think that Paul's intention here was to suggest by choosing these words, love and respect, that it isn't that those don't apply both ways. I don't think Paul would, and it's very clear in other writings, that he certainly would tell wives, you too should love your husbands, and he would tell husbands, men, that you should respect your wives or women. So what is it that why does he perhaps choose those words? I think maybe it's because he does understand that there is something a little distinct about men and women in which the deepest need is one of love, or we're going to talk about being valued, and one of respect, and how they play out. The truth is that we all have the same needs. We are all we're all human beings, and we share much alike. But those needs can be a little different because of the way that we're wired, because of our role, if you will, in what we bring to bear in humanity, and the challenges of fulfilling our purposes. And so it is that if you were to ask, and it's been done, ask all men and women, list the top 10 things that you need in your soul. What do you need from the opposite gender? What's interesting, the list of 10 is almost always very close to the same. Very similar 10 things. What's different? The order. You could almost reverse the order. The top 5 and the bottom 5. And that's where you see the biggest difference. So really, we're not negating each other's needs. What we're missing is that what is not as important to one and how they relate to it, it just is very different. It's not the same priority. It's not driven. And I think what he may grasp, and what I want to help us to consider, is that for women, what's primary is different for what men is primary. And I want to touch upon this idea about first speaking to men, to understand that for most women, in terms of what I hear from my wife, from others, from discussions, from readings, is that there is a need for men to discover a level of unconditional value for their wives, and I'm going to add women in their lives, that affirms security and significance. And let me just note that the text in Ephesians speaks very clearly to husbands and wives, and the application is within husbands and wives, within that life commitment. It's not to be presumed on all other relationships. However, I think in many ways it is speaking to something that's fundamental. And so I do think there's a word here for men to understand women and women men in general. And one would be wise to consider these differences and what is in the soul of the other. And I also know that we tend to kind of say, well, I'll do my part when they do their part, like I'm up for this when they start doing that. And Paul here is not speaking of something conditional. He's saying this is something you need to consider on your own. You can't control or fix them. You only can focus on yourselves. So beginning with men, it's understanding that women have a high value and a deep desire to be valued, My wife said something that I think we find is consistent in all literature, and some say really consistent with science, which is that women don't feel as naturally secure, that they tend to feel a little less certain about feeling okay. Men are like, whatever, man, I'll look in a mirror, just a little bit more vain. Men can feel a little confident at one level, whereas women are almost always feeling a little uncertain in ways. And the sense of is about kind of their value, and just is there this sense in which who I am, maybe the physical vulnerability, am I protected? Is the world safe for me? Does it value me? All of that may in some way play together. I don't want to over-presume. But I believe that what one begins to understand is that there is something about the way that a woman, because, again, she can be dominated physically, and there's such a history, that God is saying you need to protect that, and you need to value her, and do the things that bring that out in her soul. And so I would say that husbands will serve the deepest need of their wives or women in their life as their complementary partner, as they truly value and care for them through commitment, through thoughtful attention, and a willingness to sacrifice themselves to serve their good. And so let me just touch on those for a moment. Commitment is something that, I'll say men struggle with. But part of it is because I think women rightfully understand there is a need in terms of valuing someone that you make a commitment to them. Even back in Genesis, what we read, it says, a man will leave his father and mother and give himself, commit himself fully to this woman. And that is the heart of what needs to be happening in a marriage. And I know that we see, well, I think that one flesh thing, I think that's kind of the sex part. Yeah, I'm up for that. But there's this sense in which it's not just that. It's not just this physical. It's giving oneself as a person in body, but also in heart, in every element of you are a priority. It's giving oneself. It means I left mom. Men, I left mom. She's not my primary commitment that I have an obligation to. I will always honor mom, but my primary commitment to be making a daily commitment in life is to this new person. That commitment is fundamental to saying that you matter and that you can feel safe. That is why loyalty is so valuable. And I know that I know there's so many ways in which women and in all these cases might say, I don't know if that's entirely true. I'm not here to try to contend for that. You might say, no, it's cool if he has an affair. I don't think most women really long for that. I think there is a sense of loyalty that really is what we long for, all of us, and this is an essential part. And secondly, with thoughtful attention, with thoughtful intention. The scriptures really encourage that we learn to listen, and particularly in 1 Peter it says, and husbands, love your wives with understanding, or with the pursuit of understanding. You may not always understand them, but with the pursuit of that understanding. And that's hard, because a lot of times men go, I don't get it. I thought I said the right thing. Apparently not. But you are always navigating that I care to understand. I'm not checking out of that. As I was talking with someone, I'll ask some more questions. I want to understand because I understand that you, with a brain that's wired intuitively and connected, it's so valuable. You bring a way of thinking about things that is vital, but you need more to process, more understanding to that. And so with my little box brain, I will come and try to better kind of engage that, because when you're thoughtful and thoughtful attention, you are saying, this matters. You matter to me. And there's no substitute for it. There is just no substitute. That's why go down to the little kids, right? When you have a little child, you're holding that infant, that little toddler in your arms, and you're chatting away with somebody else. What do? They grab your face, and they go and they pull it to them. Why? Because you're not giving me that security of your attention. And I think deep down, we may grow up and not want to do that as nicely, but we want that sense of, I need your focus at times. It just seems to be out there. And that's a challenging element that we need to say. And it's not for fixing problems. This is, of course, the thing that so commonly men and women trip up on. Men feel good about fixing problems, but it's not about problem solving. It's about just processing and helping that process to continue. Because when a woman feels stress, she needs help with that process, to kind of let it out, to let out the stress by processing some of all that's going on internally in there. And that really serves. And if there's a sense of being able to understand, helps me understand, it helps you understand, that is valuable more than the fixing of something. Some problems aren't to be fixed, and we're not going to fix them all. And it's hard for us as men, but that's a good thing for us to learn how not to think we can fix everything, because it's not just about relationship to women, it's about life. You can't fix everything. So part of us growing is understanding how to have that thoughtful attention that doesn't necessarily presume that we can. And thirdly, there's this willingness to sacrifice that I think really is what speaks so much to a woman, as I understand it. And I think women don't need to know that you went out and slayed the dragon today. They don't need to know that you went and killed the lion today. They do need to know that you're willing to sacrifice something for the sake of their good. And they're looking to say, if I'm worthwhile, if this is significant, if I matter, if there's value, what are you doing that shows that there is that value? Because they can see all sorts of ways in which men find value in things. It's how they sacrifice for it. And we will do lots of things for things that we value. But where is it for them? And so I want to just mention these quickly as just a few possible ways, that questions that can be helpful to us and challenge us as men. The first is this. I would ask us, will you shake yourself free from your own fears of inadequacy and rejection and embrace the strength that you have been given to initiate in serving the needs of your counterpart? And let me just say, I understand, women, you may not get this fully, but we are so afraid of you. You laughing, I'm not. We are really afraid of you because we feel such a deep inadequacy at some level. There is a part of us that fears your rejection a lot. And so a part of that is going to always be tempted to withdraw, and that withdrawing becomes the most unloving thing we can do. But it is, we have got to, as men, realize I am really not fighting that I just really love to go sit in an office and what. It's not just what we love. We're fighting the fact that it takes courage to engage you sometimes. And so part of it is just us as men being challenged. Will we leave sometimes that place in which we're in the man cave or doing the sports or going out and playing in our nothing box worlds, to be willing to come out? Will we leave the TV? Will we leave the video gaming? Will we leave this? Will we leave those things in order to come out? And men, I think we have to ask ourselves that. That is the challenge at some level. And be willing to engage. And you might say, I don't know if I'm strong enough, because I don't know if I have the strength to sacrifice for. I don't know if I can slay a dragon. I don't know how strong I am. Let me just say, you were created, generally speaking, stronger than a woman. You were created with testosterone. Testosterone gives you not only more muscle mass on average than a woman. I know there's women I don't want to meet in an alley, but in general, every man, you have been given that which in general makes you stronger in that way, but also gives you a nature that is fundamentally one that will take risks to stop threats. That is part of every man, and every man needs to stop comparing themselves and say, I don't know how strong I am. You were given a strength. Are you going to come out and allow that strength to engage women because they need that. And they need the willingness that will go out and sacrifice for some greater good. And that means facing that we don't always get to feel good. Much easier to play it out in a video game where you always get to be the hero and kill everybody. Much easier to go to the movie and watch the superhero do it and then identify with them. We need to lay that down sometime and say, where am I in learning to just rightfully sacrifice myself? And secondly, how can you relate to women more thoughtfully, seeking understanding of their hearts and mind, which I spoke of? How can I engage that? It's challenging. Thirdly, how can you honor her dignity? And what can you and I stop that may be demeaning? And that may mean a lot of things. That may be shifting our own sense of time going over and developing sexual fantasies so that we can truly see her beauty and the beauty of every woman, instead of kind of trying to meet this need of this kind of false need and false beauty and false being wanted and all of that, and really just see the beauty of a woman. It might mean that if you're on the younger crowd and you love hip-hop music like my kids do, maybe it's time to take those songs that keep saying bitch off of the playlist. Because we're just giving ourselves to what's demeaning. And we've got to confront that sometimes and say, look, I need to say, where am I as one who honors and keeps dignity there? And it may be, lastly, how does your life reflect that self-sacrifice for the good of others? And that is hard, but how does it look like that? Am I really sacrificing for others, not just for her, but also for kids, or also for other people? Because it all is part of what she's looking to see. Are you one who will go out, taking whatever strength you have to do so? Yesterday morning, I asked about 15 to 20 guys to meet with me that it just seemed like a real healthy group to do so with across generations, so from 20s into 60s, and just to begin to say, what would it be like for us as men to challenge ourselves, to begin to truly embrace God's call for us, and then to help take those steps of growth and lead others in that. And it was a really, really rich time. And I just want to say as an encouragement to you as women that that all men long for this. And I want to say to you men, join us in this. And 1 month from this weekend, we're going to have a men's breakfast, and we're going to begin to really pick up this theme of how do we become better at initiating and influencing. And I want to encourage you men, come on out and join the journey. We're coming out of our own need to do so. But the truth of it is, God is saying to us, and He's saying to you this morning, do you understand that I created you to be a gift to women? Will you realize that most of what we're doing is using and abusing? We're not really kind of a lot of times being that gift. But in Christ, there's the power to move forward, to learn how to more understand who we are and how we're gifted and how we can bring uniquely who we are to become that gift. And I challenge you as men to kind of take that step. And I also want to close with challenging women as well this morning. What might God be saying to the hearts of women? And I would dare to imperfectly, but hopefully summarize this, that there's a need for women to discover a level of unconditional respect for their husbands or the men in their lives that is not simply earned. And I think it's been something I've found a need to do more and more, and that is just to share with women how much a man desires respect. And I know that it's kind of hard. It's like, I get that. I kind of get respect. It's not hard to understand the notion of it. I don't know that it's easy, though, for men to express it, because for a man to say, I need your respect, is to almost make himself vulnerable and weak in the first place. It's kind of counterproductive. So I don't know that many of us men would naturally say, I need respect. But deep down, we are longing for that woman who believes in us and is able to affirm our potential so deeply, so powerfully. We might choose different words, but I think respect is as good as any. And you might think, well, women need respect too. And and Aretha Franklin, isn't she the one who sang that famous song, Respect, R-E-S-P-E-C-T? She did. You want to know something? That song was written 2 years earlier by Otis Redding, and it was written to his wife, and it was the cry of the soul of a man. We might hear her singing it, And we might interpret it that way, but that's not how it was written. The soul of a man cries out, knowing, that above everything, I need that sense of knowing that I bear this responsibility that I feel to make my way in the world. And women, I encourage you to understand, every man, starting when they're boys, has such a deep question, and it doesn't mean that you don't have it at a level, but it's a defining question. That is, do I have what it takes to make it in the world? And as men, we're still trying to answer that question. And so how we relate to you has so much to do with the role that you play in either encouraging that or discouraging us in that. So profoundly. And I would encourage you to ask yourself, do I relate to men in such a way as that I'm a cheerleader of their potential, or as one who wants to criticize them and make them question their potential? And that is a profound thing that I would encourage. When 400 men were asked this question in a study, and it was this: they were asked to make a choice between two difficult situations. And they were this. One was to be left alone and unloved in the world. That sounds like the utter, that's hell, like that, it could be worse. But the other, to feel inadequate and disrespected by everyone. To be unloved and left alone, or to be disrespected and inadequate. Men predominantly would rather be unloved and isolated forever than to feel that they're inadequate. That's how they answered that question. That's how deep it runs in us. And so I want to encourage you to think that is in ways so much the core of what's in us. Now, I know that for many women, very understandably, they're saying, I love my husband, but I don't feel necessarily respect. Respect needs to be earned, right? And so what if I don't necessarily respect the way that he relates to this or this or this? He's not all that great at this. He does this. How do I work that out? And it's hard, and I do understand, and I do know that there's some women who I feel for them, as they might feel like, I'm struggling to have any. You know what? I love him, but I don't respect him. And I would say this. There's respect for how well something is developed, and then there's also respect for the fact that it's just fundamentally a part of them, irregardless of how underdeveloped or non-developed it may be. So I want to encourage you to look at the fact that men are designed a certain way, and that is our nature, even when it's not expressed very well, not developed very well, that you even just can affirm at least the nature of that. And I know so many men, as they've struggled to be, let's say, out of work or underworked, and it can appear like they just seem completely fine with that because they just don't seem to be driven. And I want to say, my view of that and my experience as a man, no, they're not. They're checking out because it's almost impossible for a guy to feel okay when they're not able to be in some way involved with providing and going out and in working and achieving. But at some point, it's so painful, it's so connected to us that we just don't know what to do with it. And so it can appear like there's an indifference, but it generally deeper is a deep wounding. And I want to encourage you as women to understand that in many ways, we as men are struggling right now because there is such deep wounding. As you know, the vast majority of men who are in prison had no relationship with their fathers. Hands down, the wounding is deep and runs deep, unaffirmed. As you know, in so many ways, our culture has shifted. More women are graduating from college than men by a long shot, and it's growing every year. Men are feeling, and I could go through 100 statistics, that they are really not needed. Culture's like, whatever, you go play your video game. Let's move on. And men are going off and playing their video games in one form or fashion because we're not really feeling needed. And if that's hard for you to, maybe if you're older, you kind of feel that, but look at younger boys right now. They feel it profoundly. So I want to encourage you as women to think of how you can love, and to close by putting it this way, that wives, women, you will meet the deepest need of their husbands or men in life as their complementary partner, as they appreciate and affirm the unique God-given design and desires of their husbands, and the responsibility that they bear in trying to be sacrificial leaders of things that God would call them to step out in. And the challenges I would include these. Will you see and affirm the positive aspects of his nature and desires as a man, which includes things like achievements, which can be very high for men. Let's go build this. Let's go create this. Sometimes they have that aspect of them that needs to be partnered with you and to fulfill it, but is that achievement orientation for things. And for peacekeeping, you think of men as the ones who go to war, and they do, and they lead off into war in a way that women would not. But there's also a part of men that understand, like in conflict with women, they don't want to go to war. That's a hard thing, so they're trying to make peace oftentimes. So value the fact that they are sometimes the ones who help try to bring things into that. And their own desires for sexual intimacy, which most men feel kind of demeaned, like, oh, I'm always written off as this kind of sicko and put down. It's like there's a part that can be that way, but there's a part that can be very healthy and natural. And instead of putting that down, affirming that it can be helpful to a relationship. All of these types of things. I ask you to think of how you can bring a healthy affirmation to what is uniquely men instead of making them feel like they're just the most bizarre things on earth. And secondly, will you seriously confront any critical spirit or critical tendencies that you have? I know that so many women go, oh, my husband or the men in my life, they need me. They need me to tell them what they need to get right. They do, and we do. But once we've heard it, it might be good to stop. Because once you've brought clarity, everything after that is not helping. Criticizing men has never made them better. Clarity is good. Criticism is different. And I want to encourage you to think about that and think about the way that I know so many women know that they want to rein that in. And it might begin by kind of unlocking yourself from the negatives. Most women say, I see my husband and I see, what are the top things they see? They're usually negative. Even challenging yourself. If you're so locked into the negative, unlock yourself. Look at him again and see him in his totality. See that even what you're frustrated with can sometimes be the flip side of what you value. And seek to grasp that again. And lastly, will you counter the tendency to fall more in love with your kids than your husband? It's very common if you're married and have kids that a woman will say, you know what, I'm just giving my heart to my kids. They need me. You even hear that? They need me. What does that imply? Your husband doesn't? It's so common because of the bonds between parents and children, especially mothers in the early years, that they kind of get all of one's heart and value. But as we all know, what can happen is they grow up and move on, only leaving this partnership empty and feeling very neglected. And so I want to encourage that doesn't happen, and these are some of the things to think about. And I want to close with this just core challenge to you and I, that God's heart for us is to understand that He created us to be a gift for one another. And if nothing else you can take this. Do you embrace, women, that you were created to be a gift to men? And where are you on embracing that? And men, can you really embrace, where are you in embracing that you were created to be a gift to women? And where are you embracing that? And it will at some point lead us to that place where we have to say, Jesus, as you fill my life, I want to follow you. And following you means following one who said that I did not come to be served, but to serve. So it means that I do not look at the opposite gender. I do not look at the complementary counterpart and say, what do I get out of them? I finally look and say, okay, that's part of it. I want to get things out of them, but what do I have that they need from me? What do they have that they need from you? Let's pray. God, we come before you as men and women, and you know far more than we that this whole mystery of being men and women, male and female, we still stand with all of the deep questions that we can't even begin to grasp. the answer to, which, what does it really mean to be a man? What's it really mean to be a woman? And how are we to relate? But we invite your Spirit now to restore in us the ability to truly choose to honor the other. So God, we come as men. I ask that you would come to us in all the wounds and all the fears and of inadequacy and all the ways we want to hide, and that you would help now to meet us in that. And knowing that you meet us, you would call us out of the bushes where we're hiding and call us to that place in which we will come back and we will learn to love and value and sacrifice and give. Let us look again at the women around us. And Father, to those here as women, you know that there are wounds that only you know. There are wounds, there has been domination, there has been demeaning, there has been so much, such deep violation, such a resentment even to be one who needs a man. I pray that you would wash over these things and help, God, to bring healing and restoration and the ability to once again give, to care, to speak, to affirm. And in a world that has said it's all about our rights and makes us adversarial by nature, I pray that we would now be able to surrender all to what you've done and submit ourselves to you in the love of one another. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you for listening to the official broadcast of the Westside Vineyard in Los Angeles. Tune in for next week's message.